who is Vice President, Director of Video Innovation at SMGX. Hi, Chris. And then next to Chris, we're going to have Bob DeSena, who's CEO of Engagement Marketing Group. And then next to Bob, we're going to have Beth Rockwood, who is Senior Vice President, Market Resources for Discovery Communications. And then we will have Melanie Schneider, who is Vice President. Vice President of Applause from AMC Networks. And then we have Kevin Smith, who is Group Vice President, Spotlight Integrated Media Sales at Comcast Spotlight. Thank you all. Okay, so advertising everywhere. It's kind of a play off of TV everywhere. I guess the notion is that if TV is going everywhere, there are advertising opportunities everywhere. But we need to hook that and make it a little more clear and concise in terms of what are the platforms we're talking about here. But what I'd like to do, just to open things up, is to have each of the panelists kind of describe who they are, what their organization is about, and how they view this notion of, I guess what we're really talking about is everything other than nonlinear television advertising. So if you could just give like your quick 2-minute view of how you look at that landscape. Think of it as a Lumascapes for dummies.
Start with me?
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Chris.
Hi, everyone. So my name's Chris Allen, and I work for SMGX, which is a division of Starcom MediaVest Group. And I have what I think is a really fun job, because my sole responsibility, my total job, is to really focus on what's happening in the emerging video landscape. And that includes everything from what's happening with connected televisions, addressable television, set-top box data opportunities, two-screen experiences, interactive television experiences, what's happening in the mobile space, and even online video, which we almost consider old school at this point because it's been around. So our goal is to really help steward our clients in understanding what's happening across these spaces and give them some guidance on ways to look at the video landscape holistically and follow the consumer in their approach to media strategy and then activation.
Hi, I'm Bob DeSena. I run an organization called the Engagement Marketing Group, and we're a senior-only executive group that provides business advice, and a lot of it has to do with revenue models. A lot of it has to do with how do you make money out of a lot of this digital landscape, as we call it. But one thing that we have tried to do very carefully is keep our eye kind of on home base, which is the consumer. In the end, it's all about the consumer and the value proposition. Many of us on this panel, I think, and certainly in the audience, have been after this convergence, addressable advertising, the whole host of things that we've been after for a long time. And we seem to have consistently represented the views of all of the constituents in this room, the business plans, the business models. There have been a lack of that same consistency in terms of representing the consumer and the value propositions. So we try to focus on that. How do we look at the landscape, Joe? We look at the landscape, quite frankly, as on air, online, and on the go. And we look at it as the video consumer in those areas, and try to keep our eye on the ball that way.
Beth?
Beth Rockwood. I work in the ad sales group at Discovery Communications, and really responsible for helping to develop strategies to monetize all of our inventory across our platform. So everything from the networks to digital, video on demand, mobile. Our viewers are definitely interested in accessing content across platforms, so it's very important to us to understand, how we can make the best of that in terms of our proposition for advertisers. We're pretty flexible about how we sell across platforms. We really try to match up against whatever advertisers really want to buy from us, because there's so many different approaches to this from the agency side. So, we try to make it easy. We have inventory that really suits the needs of different clients in different areas. So, we are excited about the opportunities we have. There's always something new, and we love to bring new things to the marketplace.
Melanie?
Hi, I'm Melanie Schneider. I am the VP of Research for AMC. basically, we bring analysis and insight to all departments within AMC, up to and including programming, scheduling, marketing, press, and ad sales. So specifically today, what I think is interesting is how we're working with the ad sales group to help the agencies and the buyers monetize all of these alternative platforms of watching our TV programs.
I'm Kevin Smith. I'm with Comcast Spotlight. We're a division of Comcast. So what we do is we sell the advertising for all the Comcast properties, but what I do is actually try to follow the impressions, and the impressions are moving from the linear environment to these different platforms. Some call it TV everywhere, but we know just through data that viewership is occurring on devices, in the home, out of the home, but when the consumer wants to watch it. So from us, we are trying to understand those dynamics and understand how they'll play at the agency in terms of the business model, in terms of our packaging to the advertisers, so that those campaigns continue to hit, traditional reach frequency objectives. So I have a good job. It's an opportunity to work in a lab and chart some new frontiers and partner with folks who are trying to define this landscape.
Okay, well, that's a great intro, and I just want to focus in on what some of you said so we could get a little more clarity. Kevin, you were talking about the platforms that the consumers are going to, and Bob, you talked about representing the point of view and the voice of the consumer, and I think that is ultimately important for all of us, right? It's all about the end user and the consumer. So when I look at all the different platforms out there I think of as being television now, it seems very cluttered. It does seem like a Terence Quadra, Lumascape type chart, and we could get into that in a moment, but I want to step back, and the research that I've seen over the last few years, whether it's Nielsen studies or CRE studies or Ball State studies, have all suggested that something like 98% of all television viewing is still going to linear television right now. Now, I'm not a researcher, and I have to accept those are great sources. If that's true, then why are we even paying attention to anything other in a meaningful way than linear television? Because if that's where 98% of the action is, or is this a bet on the future? I'd just like to hear what you all think about that. Or is the data bad? Is it just not true?
I'll jump in. I found the data that I'm looking at doesn't attribute that much, quite that high percentage to linear viewing. I think it's closer to 88 or 89% based on many of the sources I've reviewed, which is still obviously a tremendous portion of the total viewership. But what we're seeing is that although linear television continues to be very healthy in terms of total consumption, time spent, what we're finding is that some of these emerging platforms are growing at a rate much faster than that. So that's what we've got our eyes on, is watching how consumers are consuming more video. So what they're doing is the pie is actually getting larger in terms of total time spent with video. So we just want to make sure that we are covering off on all the potential touch points that consumers might actually access video, to make sure that our messaging is there in a relevant way, in a way that's not necessarily intrusive, but is actually hopefully bringing some value to them.
Yeah, and I think, Joe, you characterized it correctly. To some degree, it's a bet on the future. But I would also challenge the number, at least by segment. For example, the older segment may get closer to the 95, 98% linear or the traditional television experience. As it gets younger, it goes more online streaming. As it gets younger still, it goes more mobile or mobility. But all that aside, I think the distinctions maybe are ours. I think they're kind of legacy. And again, that point of view of thinking about it from the consumer's eye, and we're all consumers, we're all viewers, by the way. We just, play professional roles, at work, but we're all viewers. And, this notion of demand platforms, it's almost in some respects that all platforms are demand platforms now, because we have, ironically, as an industry, as a set of industries, provided consumers with the means, the technical and other means, and the psychology to just demand what we want when we want it. We've allowed them to do that, and they can tune us out anytime they want now. So everything is demand. Whatever screen they want to watch, they watch. And I think it's up to us to catch up to that experience and make some sense out of it from a business model, from measurement, et cetera, standpoint.
Yeah, Joe, I won't pick on our measurement services. I think, everybody is doing the best they can to get their arms around measuring things that are especially difficult to measure. That said, there's room for growth. I think we're all looking at numbers that tell a part of the story, but I don't feel like we have the whole story at this point. TV's certainly still dominant, but, as Chris said, we're seeing, 30% increases, 50% increases in reach and time spent with new devices. We know we're seeing a huge amount of simultaneous usage, and I think that's a real challenge to understand how to make that work for us as platforms and as advertisers rather than against us by causing distractions. And particularly among the younger consumers, where the use of new screens is so much more dramatic. I mean, the numbers double and triple as you look at younger consumers. My kids are in their 20s. I know that they don't sit and watch television without a cell phone or a laptop or a tablet, and they're often watching primarily on those devices. So it is a generational thing that's happening, and it is betting on the future to look at those things, but it's now too. It's now too. I think we just haven't caught up with consumer behavior at this point. We're watching it. We know it's growing, but we're certainly not ahead of it. We're still behind it.
I actually think AMC participates in Nielsen's extended screen measurement, and one of the reasons we did that was to really help them better the measurement. We know right now that tablets and iPads aren't a part of the measurement, but would take a lot of it from what we're hearing our consumers. But just to put it in perspective, The Walking Dead was the highest amount of added viewing as far as the extended screen measurement, upwards of 140,000 for some of the episodes. And in the scheme of things, that only represented about less than 1% of the total viewing to The Walking Dead. So I think while more MSOs and more programmers help get authenticated viewing able to be measured, and even though we know that the authenticated universe is seminal in its growth, it will get there and it will grow over time. And I think that, more for the consumer learnings early on as it grows and becomes more important to the way that people are viewing, and being convenient for people to be able to view is important.
I'm sorry, so are you actually coding commercials for the extended screen, the way
Yes.
Turner is?
Yes.
I'd like to come back to that in a little while, but I want to follow up on this first point, and I want to put aside the companion viewing aspect of this for a moment, which I think is important. I just want to talk about kind of like what Chris was talking about, that more like 80% number. So I kind of heard, whether you're bashing or not bashing any research organizations, that the belief here, and you're the biggest industry pros, is that the consumption of television content is much greater than what has been cited in some industry research, which is my feeling, but maybe we're just being emotional, irrational creatures about it. But I want to get back to that other point Bob made, and I think Beth seconded, which is that, we kind of get hung up on our own nomenclature of what platforms are. Even the word platform is stultifying. I mean, I remember when I started covering TV in the 80s, we spent a lot of time in the trade press talking about the difference between broadcast and cable and satellite. And to the consumer, it was, things like Walking Dead or Deadliest Catch. It was the shows, right? So I want to ask you, do you think that we're really in touch with how the consumers, back to Bob's point, are actually looking at using all these TV everywhere technologies? Or have we gotten caught up in, no, it's only in this linear context, the way we buy and sell?
Part of that, to some degree, is legacy of in things including organizational design. I mean, we talk about ourselves a lot, and there's a maxim that people, all of us and people in our organizations, do what they get paid to do. And when you pay someone to live in a silo, master that silo technically and in every other way, and have goals and objectives that are consistent, and that's what they do. If we're looking to truly understand the consumer, they're not looking at it in that kind of a silo environment. One thing that I would like to say, and I appreciate Joe's allowing us to say this, is that we're not just talking about the voice of the consumer, we're actively doing it. I'm really pleased to say 4 of the 5 panelists on this member, and Chris, would love for you to join us, are part of the Advanced Advertising Media Project, which is AMP, you may have heard something about. And that is a group of companies, 14 member companies today, that have suspended their individual business models for the purposes of this disciplined approach, a year long, it's now been a year plus approach to understanding what's on the consumer's mind, measuring the effectiveness of advertising in different formats, different ad loads, different approaches for demand platforms. And that's what we mean when we say the voice of the consumer. We want to go out and ask and not just render opinion on what we think the next best thing should be.
We could probably do a whole panel or case study or presentation just on AMP, and I know we don't want to do that on this panel, but if I could just sum up what I think you've done so far, and then maybe you could elaborate, and then we could move on, is that AMP has done some really good consumer testing of different interface experiences, mainly with video-on-demand platforms, and you're in the field now with an actual trial to see how consumers will accept advertising loads, basically in on-demand, video-on-demand, time-shifted environments.
Right. The key elements of the ad model: ad format, ad load, sponsorship, et cetera.
So with that, just let's follow up. And what have you learned? What have you learned about the way consumers accept or don't accept advertising in a time-shifted video-on-demand environment?
Well, what we've learned is that ad load is not a barrier to enjoyment of the show. It's not a barrier to brand acceptance, to purchase intent. All the classic measures that advertisers would use. We've learned that formats in a demand environment are more accepted. Non-traditional formats are more acceptable. And rather than take everyone's time here with us, I would invite all of you to just go to amp.blackarrow.tv, and you can download Phase 1 report for free and Phase 2 report for free. And again, every one of us up here to my left have participated in this. And we're very proud of the work. But it's very useful insights into the mind of the consumer. Into Phase 1 is about industry opinion. Phase 2 is about a simulated media lab. And as Joe said, Phase 3, we're doing live trials.
All right, so let's move on. I would like to come back to VOD in general at some point, because I think it's the critical mass other television platform right now. But I want to follow up on something that Chris alluded to just before in his statement, which is that there's an incremental factor here with these technologies. It adds to the TV opportunity and the viewing experience, which is one of the great things, and I believe it's why Nielsen's data on TV usage keeps stabilizing, or at least, or even going up a little bit. There's more opportunities. The DVR created, the VCR created, video on demand creates. All these platforms create incremental opportunities to view, and what we know is people actually like watching television, right? They can't get enough of it. But they're also watching it in places we probably don't really actively or accurately measure. Like, to me, watching a video run on my friend's Facebook page or as a short code link from a Twitter feed, whether it's Deadliest Catch or Walking Dead, or you guys don't allow Walking Dead on YouTube or whatever, the thing is, that's video consumption of television programming. Are we even accurately doing a good job of measuring what that is right now? And I know some of that's pirated. If it was on BitTorrent, obviously you're not tracking that. And some of it's just social distribution. Do we even know what all of that is, and does it represent an advertising opportunity?
I'm certainly not an expert in all things about digital measurement. I think we're doing a fairly good job. I think we're capturing a lot of that viewership. I think what we're not doing as an industry is moving quickly enough to for sellers to monetize that content and for advertisers to actually support that type of content. So I know from my perspective, our advertisers, it is very difficult to get them to embrace this idea that short-form content in the online space can be just as valuable as long-form content on a linear channel. Many of our brands just have not fully embraced that idea yet, and I think a lot of it is we have disparities between the two platforms in a lot of different ways. So one being, price. Some people think that the price for that short form content is is too high in the digital space, and so therefore they're not willing to embrace it. Another is that the ad models aren't necessarily consistent from one publisher to the next online. So sometimes advertisers find that sort of fuzzy and don't necessarily want to embrace it. I think the biggest thing that we have not done a good job of is selling advertisers on the value of reaching the right audience in the digital space. We have the capability of doing that more so than we have in television in the past. I think we spent the last 50-odd years telling advertisers that it's 100% about the context, because we really didn't have the ability to do very good audience targeting on television. And now we're starting to get to a place where we do have improved capabilities to target audiences on television. And it's not an either-or proposition. It's not about context or audience. It's about both. And so we need additional metrics to help us understand what is the right balance between reaching consumers in a specific type of context and making sure that we're actually honing in on the right consumer to begin with.
Can I just ask you for a quick follow-up on that? Because I know that you're part of Viva Key, which has an audience-on-demand platform, and through that you procure audiences, not media per se. What are you learning about the consumers who are consuming content that's online, that's extensions of television content, that's different than the way you looked at it when you were getting Nielsen or other research metrics on the aggregate audiences?
What we typically find in the digital video space is that there's actually improvements in key brand metrics versus what we see in the linear television space. And we actually attribute a great deal of that to the reduction in clutter in the space, and also the ability to serve an ad that is more relevant through audience targeting, as well as add some interactive layers. So basically taking advantage of the interactive nature of the space as a way to drive increased consumer engagement. So it's very early days still, and there's much work to be done, but those are sort of the highlights of what we're finding.
Okay, so I want to ask about the 2% solution. So earlier we had Joe Abraze on the opening panel talking about the fact that right now only 2%, or he said a couple of percent, of Discovery's revenues are coming from digital media opportunities. Which is funny because it correlates to that stat of the consumer research that only about 2% of consumption is done to digital platforms, although we've all refuted that. So I'm wondering, is there a little bit of a chicken or egg here in the sense that until we find better ways of measuring and accounting for consumer consumption on all these platforms, we'll never get the advertising revenues to follow them?
So let me try to answer that from our perspective. Our number's higher, so we're not at 2%.
What are you at?
It would be closer to 5. And
It's the 5% solution.
Yeah, the digital. Yeah, there you go. But what I would say to you is that there are multiple forces that ultimately determine where the money goes. Okay, and just to clarify what I mean is at Comcast, we're more than casually intrigued at the fragmentation that's occurring in the home and the migration of audiences across these different platforms at different times and on different devices. And being a cable company in a competitive environment, all right, we want to provide that content when, where, and how the consumer wants to view it. So from the cable perspective, TV everywhere is critical to us. From an advertising perspective, however, each of these new little pockets, which have small viewers, sometimes statistically unreliable and measured by new fledgling companies with one-off studies, okay? It's a challenge to monetize and establish a currency to an agency like an SMG or Group M, whatever, because this is new, and how does it fit into the stewardship system that we ultimately have to go back to, and what are those ROI metrics? So I mention this because we still live, whether it's 5%, 2%, there's a digital bucket of money, there's a linear TV bucket of money, and then there's line items where maybe you can get test money available to us. And our challenge, but I think our opportunity is with each of these new media, we're not so interested in establishing dynamic ad insertion as a new media. We're more interested in the mix. What's the mix for this consumer to reach them effectively to get a message across? And that's what we're focused on, because the impressions are filtered and spread across multiple devices. And that's our objective, is because we think ultimately the numbers won't be at 88%. They'll be lower, especially at a younger demographic. And to effectively reach them, there may be 5 or 6 components where video is viewed. So we're going to need combined measurement to truly understand. That's our quest, our objective, both from the cable company and also as the ad seller in moving forward. That's why we look at this from, you know, a pragmatic but an increasingly informed view as we watch where the consumer goes.
So let me ask you all a question that kind of relates to that, which is something we've been talking about all day long in a way, which is that there's a lot of complexity in this part of the business. But there's an industry that, I don't know, 60 or 70 or $80 billion, whatever estimate people put on it, that's gotten this far by being a relatively simple business, whether it's the Upfront or, you know, whatever. And I think my own impression is, you know, Spotlight probably does a great job of taking some of the friction out of the process and makes it easier for people to buy on that basis. Maybe that's why you're at 5%. Do you think the reason why we don't get more revenue for networks and why we don't have agencies spending more money on over-the-top or TV everywhere is that it's really, really complicated and it's hard to figure out?
Look, I'm thinking about this from a programmer side and a advertiser side. Fact of the matter is we know the viewers are there. The measurement for the agencies to be able to post on those measurements aren't there yet. We, as a programmer, must put our programming on platforms where the viewers want to find it, especially for AMC with the unique problem with very compelling and engaging dramas that are long story arcs. You would think that the viewer pool you're only going to pull from are the ones that you left in season 4. With these other methods, Netflix, VOD, we've been able to grow year over year on these originals consistently. We know that that's coming from these other platforms. What we can't prove exactly is how to measure that. And that's really what's keeping the money away from that program in those other platforms. And it's unfortunate for us as the programmer and unfortunate for the advertiser who's not taking advantage of it. But what we do know is ultimately by doing all of those extra efforts to build a passionate audience for these programs, that it is making the linear viewing, you know, more viewers are coming to that. So we're benefiting ultimately from that, but there's still so much work to do in all of those other pieces to make it work for both sides.
So, I mean, just a personal anecdotal experience. We're a big Walking Dead household. My daughter didn't watch season 1. She caught up on the Cablevision video on demand platform for season 2. She's your biggest fan. But, so let's talk about video on demand. I mean, it is like the elephant in the room. It's huge. I mean, you know, what is it, like 60 million households passed or some big number you probably know for top of your head, 64. A lot of consumer usage going on there, a lot of impressions, but it's not in the mix right now.
We've actually been working with some agencies to come up with a modeling demographic using a VPVT, which is what we coined as the viewer per viewing transaction. And we're basically taking those digital non-DVR homes, looking at the viewing with 1+ days, and you know, can take the leap to say that would be VOD measurement, and taking that number in your demo and applying it. That's the closest we can figure to get, and I think it works fine. It's just not ready to be mass consumed by the advertiser.
So to Kevin's point, how do you get that into the back end? How do you get it integrated with the way people plan, buy, and post television advertising?
Well,
Chris?
Yeah, I was just
Or
going to
Beth?
say I agree with Melanie wholeheartedly that measurement is absolutely a barrier to participation from the advertiser side. A couple of other things are still, sadly enough, the long lead time for commercial integration. That is a barrier for a lot of brands. Most of them can't have a piece of TV copy ready 4 weeks in advance or even 2 weeks in advance, which is about as low as it goes. So that's tough. Most of our advertisers have their copy ready 2 or 3 days prior to air. So getting them to change those production cycles is tough. The other has been, honestly, a CPM issue, a cost issue. We've seen fairly substantial premiums for VOD versus what we would pay in the linear space, and those prices have come down, and I think a lot of that is a reflection of the lack of demand on that inventory, but it's still a premium, and many advertisers just wholeheartedly reject it at this point.
So I want to talk about, if you don't mind, VOD. We have, all these companies make a lot of investments. We've made significant investments in dynamic ad insertion. It is so significant, it's almost old school. We've invested for years. It has arrived. It absolutely has arrived.
At Comcast.
At Comcast. So I certainly, would personalize it to our company, but it is there, all right? You can dynamically insert. You don't need to stitch. The impression information is there. And we need to build this business, okay? And our challenge here is we really, really want to work with a couple agencies on this. We're willing to step up on this. We understand the obstacles. We own Strata, so we know a little bit about stewardship systems, all right? We understand the issues there. We're willing to step up and help legitimize this. These viewers, I can tell you that free on-demand viewing dwarfs paid on-demand. It is a hockey stick. These viewers stay with the content, all right? There's pre, mid, post-roll. The ad rights are now being worked out. So it's a business there, but we clearly understand the issues with the agency, so we are ready to step up and partner with some shops on this to resolve this. And I'm not just talking about you've got to buy to get in. Well, we need to work through this. But it has, I can tell you, and I got that it's Comcast, but it's here. And enough to not blink at.
Beth, you had some point?
No, it's a very interesting area just in terms of comparing it to digital. We've seen about a 50% increase in overall VOD views in the last year.
Doesn't that drive Abrazé crazy that you have all those impressions and you're not selling them?
I'm staying away from that one, Joe. Yeah, I mean, it definitely the consumer is going there. We're providing more content. Most of our traffic is through Comcast. So there is a consumer appetite. There's a good marketing opportunity in terms of reminding people of programs, new programs coming up by showing past seasons. And it's also a great advertising environment. I mean, the AMP work showed that. Just a small anecdote, we started to integrate direct response advertising in fourth quarter into video on demand because the demand was down from national advertisers, as we've said. We have had every single advertiser across a dozen categories come back, renew, increase their spending with us in VOD because, as you know, they know it works. So, I mean, this is kind of an interesting, very clear signal that something is happening there, that it's an engaged audience, lower commercial load, a lot that's advantage. But, you know, even if we cobble together a viewer per 1,000 with a rent track stream number, it's still kind of it's not an easy sort of metric to use to buy television.
So what's the solution? How do we get to the easy to use metric?
Well, I think there are solutions in terms of there are a lot of things being discussed. Nielsen has opportunities if we encode content where they can read the programming on their meters. there are solutions out there. At this point, there's not a cost-effective solution that's easy to integrate into the operational process that happens. But you know, there are a lot of people looking hard, whether it's Comcast and Black Arrow or Nielsen. There are a lot of companies that are trying to make it easier to buy.
So Melanie, you said that you are paying to encode commercials for extended screen ratings. A lot of networks aren't. I don't understand why they're not. That would seem to be a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, we did know that we had something special with our programs. I mean, you know, we're still light on the original program docket for AMC, and we really didn't want to miss the opportunity to learn, you know, what there was, what insights we can learn for the advertisers, and more importantly, for the consumers. You know, it's still a very, very small portion. And, you know, like I mentioned, The Walking Dead has seen the biggest increase, which would make sense since it is so young and fits that digital viewing portion. So I think as the authenticated universe grows, it will become a bigger piece. And it's expensive to measure.
Right.
So does the cost of all the encoding and everything actually pay out in a positive ROI in the incremental viewership that you get? I'd be curious to know, or is Nielsen just
Thank
taking
God
a
for The
nice-
Walking Dead.
Okay.
Okay, I think we can open it to audience questions, if there are any out there. Advertising everywhere. Okay, so
I actually wanted to make another comment about VOD, if you don't mind. So I think that the programmers are actually getting very lazy in the way they're approaching some of these new distribution platforms. What we're continually seeing is this movement towards same commercial load as linear, whether it be on VOD or in, for long-form content that's running online, and this movement towards parity in pricing between what you'd pay in linear and what you'd pay online or in VOD. And we see that as a missed opportunity for increased monetization, because we do believe that with reduced commercial load in those spaces, there is improved effectiveness for the advertising, and we know that our advertisers are willing to pay that premium when the effectiveness is increased. We also know that when you start to incorporate choice-based models where you can give the consumer some choice in what ad experience they're going to see. You know, you put a slate up and you show them multiple options for an ad. We see tremendous improvement over just a standard pre-roll in terms of ad effectiveness. So I think simply getting lazy and just trying to roll it into a C3 rating is a short-sighted solution and is not going to pan out in long-term revenue strength.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would characterize it as laziness, Chris. What I would suggest is that we talk first about value and understand the value we're creating, and second about price. What we've tended to do, and I understand and empathize so much with Kevin, we're negotiating prices before we understand the value of things. And that's one of the things that I think when we talk about consumer point of view, we're trying to understand the world from their point of view, from our point of view as consumers. What is the value of this particular experience for a consumer, and how does that translate into a price and into an ROI? I think what we've done is we've gone the typical route and forced the sellers to negotiate price before we really understand the value. And I will tell you that from a lot of experience prior to AMP, and certainly through some of the AMP experience that we've all shared, there is an inherent value that we have found from consumers telling us that in a demand platform, just the inherent nature of a demand platform. It leverages this thing we all talk about, but few of us really understand. Beth is the one who brought up this direct response, direct marketing kind of connection. My fantasy, my world would be wonderful if the tactical brilliance of the direct community and the engagement involved, which is really a surrogate for the word involvement, and the strategic brilliance of most of the brand world was somehow to come together. And I think we have an actual opportunity in this hybrid platform we call VOD.
It's called the internet. I'm sorry.
I'm not quite sure about that.
Yeah, but
what we have with VOD is sight, sound, and motion.
And it really isn't just the internet, because it's TV. that could be 50 inches that has HD. And it can be addressable. It can have a second screen. There can be ITV elements to it. It's a little bit different than the internet.
I was just kidding.
No. I get it. And I express that because of the frustration. You know, we've got a strong business selling 30-second units. And I see that and live it and compare that to the VOD experience and the enhancements that will be available. And I will tell you, we are bullish on this, but we know that, you know, it doesn't matter how bullish we are. We need to partner, you know, with our networks and the agency community. But I intuitively, this is going to be big. It's going to be big.
So we're basically out of time, but I want to ask just a rapid fire go around across the panel. I want you each to tell me what is the greatest opportunity for us to create advertising opportunities with nonlinear television right now, and what's the one thing we could do to make it happen? And it could be you repeating something you already said, or you can, you know, you don't have to say anything. But Chris.
Oh gosh. We're seeing a tremendous amount of excitement about two-screen experiences. So ways to leverage the 30-second linear television spots that we're already buying and extend it to a second screen for deeper consumer engagement. There is a lot of excitement around that space.
VOD provides a combination of precision and scale, which is, in my experience, again, what advertisers always say they want. One thing I would just suggest in the kind of the Nike philosophy of just do it is what direct-to-consumer folks have grown up doing. It's just test, measure, and analyze. Don't just rely on your opinion. Test it, measure it, and analyze it, and then do something about it.
I think the most important thing that we can do is, with all of these video opportunities across platform, make it much more transparent, easy to understand, easy to work with, more accountable. It's all about simplifying and improving the measurement systems.
Ditto on that. We're from the research side, so of course we're going to say that. Yeah, better measurement.
So don't take this the wrong way. This is going to be a plug. We created a division called Comcast Media 360 that was set up to work with major advertisers to allow them to come in our laboratory, reach, engage, and connect with consumers and learn together with us. Sorry about the plug, but there you go.
So basically all you have to do is give Kevin your card and we're good. So
ready to go.
I want to thank this panel for being here. We have a coffee break coming up, and then we'll resume in 15 minutes. Thank you.